Hi guys, today I'll show you how to make 3D emojis in Blender, and we'll go through how to model them, make materials, light them, and then of course render at the end. And I'll show you how to make 3 different emojis with unique shapes, because each shape requires a little bit of a different approach. And yeah, let's get started with the crying face emoji. So first we need a reference. What I did then was just to open a photo editing program, add the emoji, just make it large like this, and that's probably good enough. Just save this. So then we'll just drag the reference in and place it in the center like this. Now let's add a sphere, scale it up so it matches up, and I would also rotate it 90 degrees so that this, if you look at the wireframe, this tip goes upwards like this, or downwards on the y-axis. And let's shade smooth this. We can also scale it down on the z-axis a little bit like this so it's not too round. Also click the reference image, click down here for the settings and choose front so we see it in the front, and let's also enable opacity and turn it down to maybe 0.25. This way we can also see the reference while we're modeling. Okay, now let's make this shape. So let's add another sphere, scale it down so it matches this width. And to keep it simple, let's just scale this in the y-axis to make it oval. Let's look from the side and place it on around this edge. And make sure to also smooth this sphere. Now select the main sphere, the big one. Go into modifiers and let's search for Boolean. Let's keep it on difference, choose fast, turn the overlap threshold to 0. In my experience, it just has less issues when I do this. Then select the object and select the small sphere. And now let's hide this sphere because it's just going to be used as the boolean. So let's do this to hide it. If you don't see this icon, you can enable it by clicking here and enabling this toggle. And if we hide a reference, you will see that there's some shading errors here. This is an easy fix. This is kind of quick and dirty because it ruins the topology, but in our case, we're just making this to look nice in a render. So this is how I'll solve this. Just add a remesh modifier and make sure it's on voxel. Maybe turn this to 0.01. That might be a bit too hard. Turn on smooth shading. Okay, let's do 0.05 maybe. I think that's good. We can also add a smooth modifier, turn the factor to 1, the repeat to maybe 10. And I think that's looking kind of nice. Of course, the topology is horrible, but I'm not doing this for the topology. I'm just showing like a fast way of making this emojis in 3D. All right, that looks nice. Now let's show the reference again and let's make the teeth. So to make the teeth, let's add a cylinder. We can rotate this 90 degrees and let's scale it down so it kind of fits where the teeth are. We can also move it up a little bit. It's a bit hard to see now, but let's move it like up here to the edge. So it kind of looks like the teeth. And I think this is good. And now let's add a remesh modifier to this cylinder. To do this fast, just select the cylinder, select the big sphere, click Ctrl L, and let's do copy modifiers. And now we have the modifier here too. All right, I think that looks kind of nice. And now we're going to make the eyes and eyebrows. So let's start by adding a cube and let's add a subdivision modifier. You can do this with a shortcut with Ctrl 1 or 2 or 3, which will subdivide it. You can also add it here manually. Let's also shade smooth. Now let's also hide the other shapes, but keep the reference. So we only have this sphere. Go into edit mode and make sure this is toggled. This will like preview the subdivided shape while you are in edit mode. Let's scale this down, and this is quite easy. Let's just match it up to one of the eyes, and we can just move this like this. And here in the middle, we can press Ctrl R to add a loop. Move this here. Maybe we can also scale this down. If you scale now, it will like scale inwards, which we don't want. So we can go up here, click individual origins. This will scale them separately. So we can do that a little bit like this. I think that looks good. Let's also scale this in the z-axis so it's a bit like thinner. That looks good. Okay, so now make sure the origin is here at the center. We can press N to open this menu. Go into view, make sure the location here is set to 0. And now let's go into object, set origin to 3D cursor, and go back into edit mode. Select everything here, Shift D to duplicate, and let's move it into the location for the eyebrow. And we can scale it down a little bit, and we might have to move the edges so they fit here. Just like make small adjustments to make it look like the eyebrow. All right, nice. Let's now add a mirror modifier. So now we have it on both sides. That looks good. Now let's unhide the other parts. And problem now is that it's inside it's inside this sphere. So let's move it up. Let's place it like on the edge like this and go into edit mode, select everything, and let's like scale it so it fits on the surface. There are better ways of doing this, but I'm trying to figure out, you know, the easiest way to do it quickly. So if you remove the reference now, I think this is looking pretty good. Now we just need the tiers. The tiers is a little bit complicated, but let's try it. So first add a plane. Let's move it up like this. Let's move it to the side. Actually, don't move it to the side yet. Go into edit mode and now move it to the side. This will keep the origin in the center. This will be helpful later. Let's scale it down on the x-axis so it's thinner. Let's make sure it matches up roughly to where the tiers are, you know, streaming down. All right, that looks good. Now let's go into the modifier, add a solidifier modifier. This will make it thicker. It's kind of like extruding the entire mesh. All right, so we need some loops. So let's maybe add like 5 loops here. I think that's enough. Let's also add a subdivision modifier and make sure it's placed after the solidify modifier. We can also for this hide the reference and let's look from the side. All right, so now we basically have to make sure these tiers are aligning to the surface of this sphere, and we could do this manually by selecting like an edge and manually like moving it down, and kind of making it fit, but that can be a bit tedious. And of course we could also use the shrink wrap modifier, but in many cases there's a lot of issues, like this shape doesn't look right. We probably have to do some scaling and change the settings here, which can often be hard to get correct. And the way I like to do it is to, instead of going to edit mode, select everything, and let's open the snapping settings and enable face project for snap target for individual elements. And this basically makes that so if we have selected a bunch of points, it will snap all of them individually. So now let's turn this on. Make sure you're looking from the top and just move this slightly and it will immediately snap to the surface. So if you look from the side now, it's like almost perfect. And of course there's some problems here because there's nothing to snap to. This is like flying above. But to solve this, we can probably just place these two manually. All right, I think that looks nice. Now we just have to place this upper part under the eye. So let's just move it down a little bit and up. And now we have one waterfall of tears, but we need 2. So, and also actually, let's shade smooth this so it looks a bit better. And to make 2, we'll do as we did with the eyes, just add a mirror modifier, and now that's done. So now we have all the elements we need, and it already looks like the emoji, but we need some colors. So let's add some materials. And first I'll just add a plane here for rendering, and let's add a camera. When I add a camera, I like to add it, then go into view, and then reset the position and rotation by clicking Alt G and Alt R. And then I just click G to move it, double click Z to move it on the Z axis, and just drag backwards. This is just a quick way of setting up the camera so it's like directly above. All right, now let's add a new collection. Let's call this lights. It's kind of messy here, but I like to keep the lights in one collection. And I often have a preview render here in the corner. So let's turn on this. Now it's of course all black. Let's start with materials and let's do lights at the end. So before we add lights, but we want to see something here. So let's click this arrow down. Let's disable scene lights and scene world. This will basically light this with a HDRI that is like inside the Blender already. Let's also move this reference to the side here and turn the opacity to full so we can see it clearly. Now let's select the head, add a new material. And now to get the right color, we could try to click E while hovering over this color to get the eyedropper and eyedrop here. But since it's a reference image, it just gets ignored and it just picks up a gray color. So what we could do is to open up a new window, like just a small one here. Open the UV editor, or the image editor works too. And let's just select the reference here. And now that we have it in the image editor, we can use the eyedrop tool. So let's click E while hovering over here and let's choose a yellow color. And I think we can do a bit more like darker orange color. I think that's maybe a bit better. I think that's good. And let's do the teeth. I think the teeth are good. We can just make them a little bit darker. And for the eyes and eyebrows, let's do the same eyedropper tool, get a dark brown color. We can make it a bit darker. We can also go into the specular here, turn out the specular a little bit. And this basically turned down the kind of the reflections on the surface. So if you turn this to 0, you will see that it's all the way brown, but if we turn this to max, we'll see more reflections, and we can turn this to like 0.25, I think, to make the colors a bit clearer. And then let's do the tiers, add a new material, click E, and let's take a blue color from here, maybe actually a much darker one. I think that's better. Maybe we can do it a little bit darker, a little bit less saturated. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. All right, that looks good. You can also add a subsurface scattering, which would make this look a bit more like wax or like skin, which could be nice. But in my case, I'm rendering on a Mac. So I'll keep subsurface off, but if you have a stronger computer, like I recommend adding this. This will like, I think it will look nice. All right, but now let's do the lighting. So first go here, enable scene light and scene world again, and let's add some lights. We can also probably hide the reference. So for lights, I usually just add a area light first, and I click G and Z to move it up like this. And I often keep the 3D cursor here in the middle. Then I select 3D cursor for the pivot point. This basically makes it so that when you rotate, it rotates around the 3D cursor instead of rotating just around the light. This is very nice when you're lighting something, because then if you're like, oh, I want the light above, I can just click rotate it and then move it like above easily. And let's turn this up, maybe put this to 3, and it's gonna look like it's getting interrogated like this. You know, let's just have a big light, a big strong light like this, maybe 2500. I think that's good. You know what, maybe we should remove the background. I think that's nice, yeah. And I think we can keep this lighting simple. Let's just have this at the top and click Shift D to duplicate it and rotate it and put one behind 2. This is to get that nice rim light. We can make this even bigger, maybe like 30, and we can also up the strength. I think that's nice. It's a little bit dark under here, so I also like to add a plane to use as a reflector. Of course, we don't want to see this in the render, so if you go into object settings, go to visibility, turn off camera, this will get invisible for the camera. And now we can scale this up and place it maybe like under here. And it's kind of nice to just add some fill light here without adding a physical light, because adding a light might be too strong and it doesn't always look natural. So adding a reflection can be nice. We can also make this a bit darker because it's a bit strong, something in the middle. I think this is nice. Like here is very dark, a little bit softer. All right, there's our first emoji done. Now let's render it. You can see that there's actually still some issues here around the mouth with the remeshing. So let's fix that. I think a quick fix is just to turn the voxel size down a little bit, maybe to 0.03, and then turn the smooth up a bunch, like 50. And I think that's kind of solves it. Yeah, I think that's good enough. It's good enough for this. All right, so this is the first emoji done. Let's move on to the next one. All right, so next up, we're creating these tiers emoji. And to start with this, open the image setting, select front here, enable opacity, choose 0.25 so we have it transparent. And now let's place it so that one of the droplets is in the center. And let's start by adding a sphere. Let's scale this down and make sure it aligns with the reference, and go into edit mode. And if you see here, you can see that the geometry is kind of pointing upwards. See that the center vertex is at the top here, and we need to rotate this. So click RX90 to rotate it 90 degrees so that we have this center vertex at the top. And now look from the top, click GY to move it upwards. And of course, we want to move these other parts too. And we could do this manually, but that is a lot of work. So let's do it an easier way. So to do that, go up here, click this button or press O to enable proportional editing. Make sure you have sharp selected. And now click GY to move it up. And if you see now, you see a circle. This is the fall off of the proportional editing. And to make this bigger, we scroll down. And I think this looks, so I think this is good enough. And now we want this top to look more round because now it's very sharp. So let's hide the reference. And also let's make this shaded smooth. To make this soft, go into edit mode, hold Alt and click this edge to select the edge loop. Double click G to slide it. So let's slide it up a little bit. Then go into vertex mode and select this top vertex. Let's move it down a little bit and then add a subdivision modifier, maybe level 2 like this. And now we have a nice droplet. So now turn on the reference again. Let's click Alt G and Alt R to reset the positions. Select the droplet, place it in the right position like this. Duplicate it with Shift D, place it here, scale it down a little bit. I think this looks nice, and do it for the last droplet too. Nice, now let's do the materials. Let's enable render preview here. Click the arrow down and disable scene lights and scene world to get the preview lights. go into the material editor, click new, and let's also add a new window here. And let's make this into an image editor. And let's select tears emoji here. So we have it here. And for the color, click E while hovering over here and just select one of the darker areas. And I think this is a good color. Now let's copy this material to the other droplets. So select 2 droplets and then select the one with material at the end. Click Ctrl L and click link materials. And now all of them are blue. And if you look closely at the reference, you see that it has a glossy surface. To do this, let's just turn the roughness down. And I think that looks good enough. Now let's do the lighting. So turn on the scene light and scene world again. And now let's add a area light, move it up, make it much stronger. Also, let's make it larger. And now we have a problem where you see that this area light, it has hard edges like this. But in the reference, you see that it has like a nice gradient and it's more soft. And we can kind of emulate this by opening the material or a shader editor, enabling use nodes on the area light, and then add a gradient texture node, plug this into color and add a new node called texture coordinate node, connect the UV into the vector here. Now you see that we have a nice gradient here. We can also make this a bit stronger. So let's make this into maybe 2000 and then rotate this plane around until we have something that kind of looks like the reference. Maybe make it even stronger. And also make it a little bit wider like this. I think this looks good enough. It's not perfect, but it's I think it's pretty close. Now let's also get a rim light down here. So click the area light. Here, select 3D cursor for the pivot point. Click Shift D to duplicate the area light. Click R, X, and then write 180 to put it behind. Let's also move the light right under the droplet so we get a nice rim light like this. Let's turn this strength down a lot. And honestly, I think we're done. Maybe a little bit weaker. And then we just press render and we have the droplets made. Alright, so for the last emoji, we're making a completely normal, average-sized vegetable. So first, let's go into the image settings here. Let's choose front, enable perspective if you haven't already, enable opacity, make it 0.25. And let's start by adding a cube, scale it up a bit, and let's add a subdivision modifier. Let's make it level 2. Let's also smooth shade it, scale it up even more. Let's go into edit mode. And remember to enable this so we can see the subdivision in the edit mode. And then just move the faces so it fits the shape. Let's also add some edge loops here. So we kind of just add edge loops and change the shape until it looks more or less like the reference. Okay, I think this is good enough. Now we have the base shape. Now let's do the hardest part, no pun intended, which is this green tip. And for this, let's go into edit mode, select this part and click Shift D to duplicate, click P to separate so we get it as a known shape. Add a solidify modifier, make it larger like this. I think this is good enough. Let's also apply the subdivision and remember to toggle this so we can see the geometry here. And we can delete most of this geometry, so let's delete all of this. And this is kind of a brute force thing, but here we just change the model to make it fit the reference. So you just select some edges, extrude it out, and just make sure it looks similar. It doesn't need to be perfect. Let's add some edge loops, scale it down. Let's merge these. I think this is looking nice. And for these leaves at the side, you don't need to make it all the way around. We just need to make the parts we are seeing. So let's make this side and let's do it for this one too. Let's scale it out a little bit like this. I think that looks okay. Let's also add another subdivision modifier and now it smooths it a lot. So we want to keep these edges sharp, and to do this, we go into the solidifier modifier, go into the edge data. For the rim, make this into 1 so it's sharp like this. And now let's make this tip. Go into edit mode, select these 4 squares, click I to inset, and before clicking anything, hold Control, move your mouse, and you can also move it like outwards. I think this looks nice. Let's also add a edge loop here, scale it down, and I think that's it. Now we have a basic shape here of the aubergine. So now let's render it. So click on render preview, disable the scene light and world. Let's start with the base. So select this, add a new material, and for the colors, make sure you also have the image editor open, and let's select the reference here. Now let's click E here and eyedrop the purple color. Also for aubergine, let's also go into specular, turn this down to 0.25 because this is a bit weaker, I see. Then let's make the top, click it, add a new material, click E on the color, and let's choose one of the darker green colors here. And we probably have to make it more saturated. I think this is probably good enough. And now let's do lighting, enable scene lights and scene world again, add a area light, make it much stronger. We can also make it larger, maybe actually make it like thin like this so it fits this kind of light, and I'll move it up a bit, and I think that looks nice. cursors. Let's add a rim light. So let's duplicate it, enable 3D cursor here, click RX 120 to put it behind. Let's scale it up a bunch more, maybe something like this, and can make it a bit weaker. And now it's a bit dark here, so let's add a reflector. So add a plane, just a normal plane, and go into object settings, visibility, and disable camera, so it's invisible in the camera. And then let's just place it around, I think around here is good. And you know what, when I look at the top here, it's looking a little bit thin. So let's go into the modifier settings and let's make this thicker by making the thickness larger. And I think it's ready. So now let's just click render, and there we have a aubergine in 3D too. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something, and make sure to like and subscribe because I'll be posting more tutorials like this. And yeah, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.